I'm James, a 38-year-old man with rough hands from the wind and soil of the orchards that stretch across my land in a small village near Cornwall, England. I live with my wife, Clara, and our 3 children. Tom, 8 years old, Lily, 5, and Ben, 3. 12 years ago, we married in a tiny chapel in Devon, under a sky that smelled of salt and wildflowers, her smile catching me like the sound of waves crashing on the cliffs. Back then, I worked in a garage in Plymouth, my nails black with grease, the sea air clinging to my skin, while she knitted at home, humming folk songs that filled our cramped flat. We moved to this village for a quieter life to raise the kids, a place where the gulls cry overhead and the wind rattles the apple trees. But over time, her laughter faded, and a silence grew between us, heavier than the mist that rolls in from the coast. My days are simple. I wake at dawn, prune the trees, gather apples in season, smoke a cigarette by the shed at dusk, and sleep with the sound of the sea whispering through the cracks. That morning began like any other, with the children's noise echoing from the kitchen. I woke to Tom shouting because Lily had snatched his toast, his voice sharp with childish anger, while Ben wailed after spilling his milk, a white puddle spreading across the worn wooden floor. I came downstairs, my shirt creased from yesterday, still smelling of sweat and earth, my back stiff from a week tending the orchards. Clara stood by the stove, stirring porridge with a wooden spoon, her faded apron hanging loose, her hair tied in a messy bun that unraveled as she moved. Her face showed no trace of the joy I'd once known in Devon, just lines of weariness and something I couldn't place. "Morning?" I muttered, slumping into a chair with a mug of tea that tasted stale, bitter and lukewarm. She grunted something, her eyes fixed on the pot, as if I weren't there, my voice just another gust of wind passing through. Years ago, in Devon, we'd talk late into the night under the stars, dreaming of kids running through fields, the sea humming in the distance. Now we barely speak, and her silence cuts deeper than the pruning shears I use daily. My days repeat. Wake, trim branches, take Tom to the village school, fetch the kids, smoke by the shed, sleep. But something jolted me that morning. In the sink, among dirty plates and bent spoons, I spotted a mug I didn't recognize. Blue, with a clumsy daisy painted on it, not one of our plain, chipped ones. I picked it up, holding it like it might break, and asked, "Where'd this come from?" Clara turned fast, almost dropping the spoon, her hand shaking for a split second. "The neighbor lent it yesterday," she said flatly, but her eyes darted aside before returning to the stove, her words sounding hollow. I set the mug down, said nothing, but a splinter of doubt lodged in my chest, sharp and unyielding. Clara left soon after, saying she was off to the village for flour, a short walk down the lane past the apple trees. The kids kept at it, Tom chasing Lily with a rag, yelling for his toast back, Ben tripping over a stool and crying again, and I stayed to settle them, the tea cold on the table, crumbs sticking to my fingers. Over an hour passed, longer than it takes to walk there, by, and return even with a chat. When Clara came back, her hands were empty, her apron crumpled, her face flushed as if the wind had caught her too long. "Forgot my purse?" she mumbled, slipping into the kitchen without meeting my eyes, her voice quick and low as she turned to the sink. "What took so long then?" I asked, arms crossed, my tone steady but firm, like when I tell Tom to behave. "Talking to people, James, don't nag," she snapped, her hands fidgeting among the dishes. Her gaze avoided mine, her excuse thin as the mist over the cliffs. I didn't push, sat back down, sipped the cold tea, and let silence fill the gap again. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Tom asking for a pirate tale I half made up, Lily clutching her rag doll, Ben snoring before I finished, Clara washed dishes, humming a tune from Devon that felt out of place here. I swept the floor, crumbs crunching under the broom, dust swirling in the lamplight. Then I saw it. Under the couch, a brass button with a silver edge glinted in the shadows, too fine for my work clothes or her plain dresses, belonging to someone else. I held it, cold and heavy, and glanced at the kitchen where her shape moved, water splashing softly. I slipped the button into my pocket, beside the growing doubt, and that night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, beams casting shadows in the wind, her humming echoing in my mind like a stranger's song. Life rolled on, wake, prune, fetch the kids, smoke, sleep. But that button, that mug, were cracks in the routine I couldn't ignore. The sun rose again over the orchards, painting the sky with a soft pink that mingled with the sea mist, and I was back at it, trimming dry branches from an old apple tree, the shears creaking in my hands. The Cornish wind bit at my neck, sweat trickling down my face and dripping onto the cracked soil beneath my boots. The air smelled of salt and warmed leaves, a scent I'd known for years, as familiar as the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Through the open kitchen window, I saw Clara peeling potatoes with a blunt knife, the steady scrape filling the stillness, her hands moving with rote precision. But her eyes weren't on the peels or the kids playing outside, chasing each other with sticks across the damp grass, their laughter rising like gulls. She stared down the lane toward the village, a winding path flanked by gnarled trees, and there was an odd gleam in her gaze, something I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. I wiped my hands on my trousers, left the shears in a branch, and stepped inside, the damp air clinging to me like a second skin. "What are you staring at?" I asked, leaning against the doorway, my voice even but curious. She flinched, the knife slipping, nicking her finger, a bead of red staining the potato. "Ouch!" she gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth, and I grabbed a cloth from the drawer, my boots scuffing the floor. As I wrapped her finger, I caught a whiff of something sweet, like cheap perfume, not the soap we use or the sweat of the day. "You wearing scent?" I said, half joking, though the doubt gnawed at me. "Don't be daft, James. It's the soap," she replied, pulling her hand back fast, her cheeks flushing beyond the morning chill, her voice quivering for a moment before she turned back to the potatoes. "I didn't buy it. That smell wasn't from our house." And her flinch was a curtain hiding something. I said nothing more, went back outside, picked up the shears and kept trimming, the snap of wood filling the quiet. The sun climbed higher, the wind tugged at the trees, and I worked on, branch after branch as always. That afternoon, the kids played in the yard, their shouts bouncing off the stone walls. Tom splashed Lily with water from the well, her squeals piercing the air as she ran, while Ben crawled through the grass, giggling as he chased a beetle. Clara came out, saying she was off to the well for fresh water, a chore she did when the heat lingered. "I'll come," I offered, setting the branches aside, the shears resting on the trunk. "No need, watch the kids." She refused, sharp and quick, and left with the bucket swinging in her hand, her steps brisk down the lane. I watched her go, her shape shrinking among the trees, her coat flapping in the breeze, and something in her haste tightened my jaw. She was gone over an hour, far longer than a trip to the well and back, even with gossip. When she returned, the bucket was half empty, her face red, her coat creased along the back as if she'd sat somewhere damp. "That long for water?" I asked, standing by the door, hands in pockets, voice calm but steady. "Chatted with the baker's wife, lost track," she said, dodging my eyes as she slipped inside, setting the bucket down with a thud. Her excuse rang hollow, her breath uneven, not from the bucket's weight or the walk. I let it go, went back to trimming, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the yard. The kids kept at it, Tom chasing a stray hen now, Lily singing to her doll, Ben tumbling over roots and laughing. Clara stayed in, peeling more potatoes, humming that tune again. Life plodded on. I pruned, took Tom to school, fetched the kids, smoked by the shed, told bedtime tales. But that night, after a supper of cold stew that barely filled us, I cleared the table while Clara scrubbed pots, the village quiet seeping through the windows, broken only by crickets and her hands on the dishes. I stepped outside to smoke, the lighter flickering in my clumsy grip. Then I saw it. Near the bucket, in the grass, a gleam caught the moonlight. I bent down. A silver earring with a green bead, delicate and shining. "Clara doesn't wear earrings, says they itch since we wed." I turned it over, cold in my fingers, and glanced at the house. She scrubbed away, humming, her shadow swaying in the dim light. I tucked the earring into my pocket with the button, a knot twisting in my gut, tight as old rope. Life rolled on, day after day. Wake at dawn, prune the trees, take the kids to school or play, smoke by the shed, sleep with the wind howling outside. Clara cooked, knitted, scrubbed, went to the village with excuses that didn't add up, came back empty-handed, her face flushed, that gleam in her eyes unexplained. I said nothing, asked nothing, just kept pruning, smoking, staring at the ceiling at night while she slept beside me, breathing easy. But those things, the button, the earring, weighed in my pocket like stones dropped into my life, and the doubt grew slow and steady, like the tide creeping up the Cornish shore. The dawn crept in again, the sky paling over the orchards with a faint gray that soon turned blue, and I was in the parlor helping Tom with his sums, hunched over the creaky oak table. He scribbled crooked numbers, frowning as I explained for the 10th time, his pencil digging into the paper. The table was littered with toast crumbs and stray pencils, the air thick with the smell of old books and damp earth from the open window. Outside, the sun warmed the trees, the wind rustling the leaves, and the kids' voices drifted in from the yard. Then Lily burst through the door, her pigtails loose, eyes wide with excitement as she hopped barefoot, tracking mud across the floor. "Dad, Mum said something odd," she chirped, her voice cutting through the quiet like a gull's cry. "What did she say?" I asked, setting the pencil down, my pulse quickening though my tone stayed flat. "She said Uncle Daniel's coming tomorrow with sweets," she blurted, then dashed off to chase Ben, who giggled as he toddled with a stick. I froze, breath caught in my chest like a stone had lodged there. "We don't have an Uncle Daniel. My brother's John, up in Bristol with his wife and kids we see once a year, the rest of my kin scattered in Devon or long gone." Who was this Daniel slipping into my home like a whisper on the wind? I said nothing, went back to Tom's sums, pointing out his mistakes, my voice steady but my mind spinning. Days trudged on. Wake at dawn, prune the trees, walk Tom to school down the muddy lane, fetch the kids, smoke by the shed, tell tales at bedtime. But that name, Daniel, stuck like a burr, echoing in my head, a piece that didn't fit. That afternoon, as the kids played outside, the sun slanting through the trees, I watched Clara from the doorway. Tom kicked a ball against a stump, the thud ringing out. Lily sang to her doll, her voice rising and falling. Ben tripped over roots, laughing. Clara sat in the kitchen, darning a hole in Tom's jumper, the needle flashing in the light, white threads stark against the faded wool. Her fingers moved deftly as ever, but her eyes were on the window, fixed on the lane winding through the orchards to the village, a faint smile on her lips. Not for me, not for the kids, but for something beyond these walls. "What's up, Clara? You're off?" I said, stepping in and leaning on the table, my voice calm but edged, like a blade you don't notice till it cuts. She glanced at me, pursed her lips, then softened them. "Nothing, James, just daydreaming," she replied, eyes dropping to the jumper, her fingers tightening on the needle. She didn't meet my gaze, and that dodge burned like a swig of raw cider. I grabbed a beer from the pantry, the bottle cold against my palm, and let it drop, though her words buzzed in my skull like a trapped fly. That night, after a supper of watery soup, stale bread sinking in the broth, its taste flat, I tucked the kids in with short tales I made up on the spot. Tom begged for pirates, his voice fading. Lily hugged her doll. Ben snored before I finished, his breath soft in the dark. Clara stayed downstairs, scrubbing dishes, humming that Devon tune, the sound of water splashing rising through the house. I went upstairs to change, kicking off my muddy boots, and saw her bag open on the chair, its worn fabric spilling its contents. I don't snoop, never have, but something pulled me. I reached in, fingers brushing handkerchiefs and coins, and pulled out a crumpled note. "Tomorrow at 4 by the stile." It smelled of that sweet perfume I'd caught on her. Not our soap, not from here. I peered downstairs. Clara scrubbed on, water running, her tune drifting up in the gloom. I slipped the note into my pocket with the button and earring, and sat on the bed, heart thumping though my face stayed blank. Life plodded on. Wake at dawn, prune the trees, walk Tom to school, fetch the kids, smoke by the shed, tell tales. Clara cooked, darned, scrubbed, went to the village with flimsy excuses. Flour, bread, water. Came back empty, cheeks red, eyes glinting with no reason. I said nothing, asked nothing, just kept pruning, smoking, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me. Her breathing calm against the storm in my head. The things in my pocket, the button, the earring, the note, grew heavier, like pebbles tossed into my life, and the doubt swelled, slow and sure, like the sea rising against Cornwall's cliffs. Tomorrow at 4, someone would be at the stile. Not family, not a friend I knew. But I went on, pruning, smoking, waiting, the wind biting my skin, Clara's silence gnawing at me. The sun rose again, gilding the orchards with a light that shimmered on the leaves, and I was in the kitchen making soup, the smell of onions and carrots rising in the morning air, the knife thudding on the scarred board. Wind off the coast slipped through the window, carrying salt and the faint tang of apples, a scent baked into my days. As I crumbled stale bread into the pot, I noticed a gray coat on the hook by the back door. Not mine, not the kids', thick and reeking of strong tobacco. A sharp whiff that didn't fit this house where I smoke cheap cigarettes outside. I brushed dirt off my boots from the orchard, stepped over, and sniffed it, the wool rough under my fingers, the smell twisting my gut. "Whose is this?" I called, voice cutting through the pot simmer. Clara came out, wiping her hands on her apron, hair loose over her face like a tangled curtain. "The postman's wife lent it. I stopped by yesterday," she said evenly, but her eyes flicked away, searching for somewhere to land. "Since when does she smoke pipe tobacco?" I pressed, holding the coat, the stench clinging to me. "Don't be daft, James," she shot back, turning sharply to the kitchen. Her excuse stank worse than the coat, her calm a thin mask. I hung it back, said nothing, returned to the soup, stirring harder than needed, the spoon scraping the pot. Life went on. Wake at dawn, prune the trees, walk Tom to school, fetch the kids, smoke by the shed, tell tales. But that coat stuck in my mind, another piece I didn't want to fit. That afternoon, the kids played in the yard as the sun sank, casting gold over the trees. Tom lobbed stones at a stump, the clack echoing. Lily sang to her doll. Ben crawled after a hen, giggling as it flapped away. I thought of the coat, its tobacco smell, Clara's trips to the village stretching too long. As dusk crept in, I trimmed branches by the shed, shears snapping, sweat beading despite the cooling air. Clara was inside, cooking, humming that tune like a ghost of Devon. Life trudged on. Pruning, school runs, smoking, sleeping, the wind howling outside. But that night, after a thin soup supper, the kids crashed early, worn out from play, and silence draped the house, pierced by crickets and the sea's distant roar. Clara scrubbed pots, humming low, and I lingered in the parlor, eyeing the coat, its bulk an intruder. In the dimness, with just the sink splash for sound, I checked it, boots soft on the floor. I dug into the pockets and pulled out an old lighter, the kind that sparks loud, with a worn D scratched into the metal. Not the postman's wife's, not anyone I knew. I rolled it in my fingers, its chill biting against the heat rising in me. A heat not from the day but from something clicking into place. I glanced at the kitchen. Clara scrubbed on, her tune a veil over what I couldn't face. I stashed the lighter with the button, earring, and note, a growing pile of weights I couldn't shed. I lay beside her that night, sleepless, her breaths even as she faced away, my eyes tracing the ceiling's shadows in the wind. This Daniel Lily mentioned was taking shape. A man leaving traces like breadcrumbs I didn't want to follow. Life rolled on. Wake at dawn, prune the trees, walk Tom to school, fetch the kids, smoke by the shed, tell tales. Clara cooked, darned, scrubbed, went to the village with excuses. Flour, bread, water. Came back empty, cheeks flushed, eyes glinting. I said nothing, asked nothing, just kept pruning, smoking, staring at the ceiling while she slept, her calm breaths clashing with the noise in my skull. The things in my pocket grew heavier, and the doubt swelled, slow and steady, like mist rolling in from Cornwall's jagged coast. The sun climbed again, warming the orchards with a glow that danced on the leaves, and I was in the yard pruning an old apple tree, shears snapping through brittle twigs, the Cornish wind tugging at my coat. Sweat trickled down my back, sticking my shirt to my skin, the air sharp with salt and grass. The kids romped nearby, their voices weaving through the trees. Tom booted a ball against a trunk, the thud ringing out. Lily sang to her doll. Ben toddled after a hen, chuckling as it scurried off. Clara stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, and said from the doorway, "I'm off for bread." I straightened, a twig in hand, sweat beading on my brow. "Take Ben, he's underfoot," I said, voice steady but firm, like telling Tom to tidy up. "I'll go alone, won't be long," she snapped, grabbing an empty basket and hurrying down the lane, her shape fading among the trees. I watched her go, her coat flapping, and her rush clenched my teeth, though I turned back to the shears, twigs piling at my feet. 2 hours passed, too long for a quick trip, even with chatter. The kids kept at it. Tom smashed a flower pot with his ball, clay shards scattering. Lily whined as her doll fell. Ben giggled chasing the hen. I pruned on, shears biting harder, the sun high overhead. When Clara returned, the basket was empty, her face red, a faint whiff of petrol clinging to her, not bread or the village shop. "Where were you?" I asked, blocking the door, hands in pockets, tone calm but solid. "Village, no bread left," she lied, slipping past, her eyes dodging mine, her hands shaky as she dropped the basket. Her words dissolved like smoke in the wind, that petrol smell lingering, a clue I couldn't shake. I said nothing, went back to pruning, the sun beating down, dust swirling underfoot. The kids played on. Tom after the hen again, Lily singing, Ben tumbling in the grass. Clara stayed in, chopping veg, humming that tune. Life dragged on. Wake at dawn, prune the trees, walk Tom to school, fetch the kids, smoke by the shed, tell tales. But that night, after a supper of fried spuds that didn't satisfy, I tucked the kids in while Clara scrubbed pots, the house quiet save for the wind. Tom drifted off mid-tail, Lily hugged her doll, Ben snored, mouth agape. I checked the truck by the shed, moonlight glinting off the metal. The tank was full. I hadn't driven in days, no reason for petrol here. By the back door, in fresh mud from the well, a big boot print, deeper than mine, stood out. Then, in her apron pocket, I found a crumpled petrol station receipt, 20 miles off, dated today. I added it to the button, earring, note, and lighter, a heap of signs stacking up. She wasn't after bread, but something else, leaving marks on my land, my life. Days plodded on, wake, prune, school runs, smoke, sleep. Clara cooked, darned, scrubbed, went off with excuses, came back empty, eyes glinting. I said nothing, asked nothing, just kept pruning, smoking, staring at the ceiling while she slept, her breath steady against the storm in my head. The things in my pocket weighed me down, and the doubt grew, slow and sure, like the tide creeping up Cornwall's shore. The sun rose once more, gilding the orchards as the wind swept in from the sea, and I was in the kitchen frying eggs, oil spitting in the pan, the smell of grease and potatoes filling the damp air. The kids romped outside, Tom kicking his ball, Lily singing, Ben chasing the hen, their voices drifting through the open window. Clara came out, apron in hand, and said, "I'm fetching water from the well." I flipped an egg, oil popping, heat sticking my shirt to my back. "I'll come," I offered, setting the spatula down. "No, stay," she refused, grabbing the old jug and hurrying off, her shape vanishing down the lane. I watched her go, a tightness in my chest growing, and decided to act. I killed the flame, left the eggs half-cooked, and followed quietly, ducking behind trees, mud clinging to my boots. At the stile, a crooked wooden gate by the lane's end. I saw her, Clara with a tall man, dark-haired, in a leather coat. They hugged, spoke low, her laugh ringing out, a sound I hadn't heard in years. It was Daniel, the sweets man, the lighter's owner. I stayed hidden, heart pounding, rage boiling up like bitter ale. I slipped back, unseen, boots crunching mud, mind racing. I said nothing, went on, pruned, took Tom to school, smoked by the shed. But that night, after tucking the kids in, Tom with his pirate tail, Lily with her doll, Ben snoring, I dumped the evidence on the table. Button, earring, note, lighter, receipt. I know, I said, voice rough, hands shaking. Clara turned from the sink, pale, collapsing into a chair, apron bunched in her lap. What's this? She stammered, but her tears spoke first. Daniel, right? I pressed, staring her down. She sobbed, spilled it. 2 years with him, a mate from Plymouth, filling gaps I didn't see. This isn't living, she choked, then went upstairs. I didn't shout, just gathered the stuff and planned. Next day, I hid a camera in the bedroom rafters and drove to Truro to see Mick, an old copper pal who owed me a fix on his van. I laid it out, the button, earring, note, lighter, receipt, everything. Enough for court, he said, puffing his cigarette, ash falling. We schemed. Recordings, custody, the house. Weeks later, the tapes caught Daniel sneaking in, their laughter in my bed, their whispers in the dark. I took it to court in Truro. Photos, items, videos, my word against hers. The judge ruled. Kids and house mine, Clara out with nothing. Back home, the sun dipped over the trees, wind rattling the leaves. She packed in the kitchen, a battered bag on the table, hands trembling as she folded clothes. You brought this on, I said, leaning on the door, voice flat but sharp. She didn't answer, zipped the bag, and left, her shape fading down the lane, the sky red behind her. The kids played on. Tom with his ball, Lily singing, Ben after the hen. Oblivious. I lit a cigarette, smoke curling up, and watched my win. The law made her pay, her betrayal sank into the mud, and I stood clear, kids and home intact, no blood on my hands. Life rolled on. Prune, school runs, smoke, sleep, alone now, with the silence she left behind.